Today is January the 18th. Does God expect us to make sacrifices? Let's find out together as we study Genesis 20 to 23. So today we'd like you to read Genesis chapter 20 to chapter 23. As we begin this passage, there's a short paragraph about Abraham before Abimelech doing the same thing that he did earlier with Pharaoh in Egypt. Chapter 21 begins the crux of this story. We have the birth of Isaac. It starts out saying the Lord kept his word. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a child. That child was named Isaac. Isaac, similar to the Hebrew word for laughter, because he brought joy to Abraham and Sarah. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. When Sarah weaned Isaac, which would have taken place when Isaac was around 5 or 6 years old. Yes, this is a different time. When she weaned Isaac, she felt that Hagar and Hagar's son Ishmael, who by now was 12 or 13 years old, mocked her and her son Isaac. So she told Abraham, throw her out, get rid of her. Abraham did send him and the boy away. And again, the Lord intervenes and protects both Hagar and Ishmael. Here, the Lord promises to Hagar that Ishmael will also become a great country, a great nation. In chapter 22, we have a very unusual episode. Sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. And God says, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much. Go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Abraham leaves, and he goes to Mount Moriah. And you read the story. You see how it is that Abraham prepared for the sacrifice. And just before he was to plunge the knife in his son's chest, an angel of the Lord stopped him and said, I see now that you're willing to sacrifice what you love most in the world. Tells Abraham to look behind him. There he sees a ram with his horns caught in a thicket, and he sacrifices the ram instead. Two things about this passage that are not quickly apparent. One is a concept that the Israelites called the Akedah. Akedah Isaac. In Hebrew, it means the binding of Isaac. Abraham bound Isaac in 22:9 and put him on top of the altar. And yet Isaac was strong enough to carry all of the wood for the sacrifice all the way to the top of the mountain. Isaac was not a toddler. Isaac was a young man old enough to bear a heavy burden going up a mountain. Josephus, who writes at about the time of Jesus, says that Isaac was 24 years old. So how could it be that Abraham, now over 100 years old, could subdue his son and bind him? Well, the Akedah Isaac, the binding of Isaac, is the concept that Isaac was a willing participant in that sacrifice. Some of the intertestamental literature goes to links to give Isaac a speech in which he submits to his father, allows himself to be bound, in fact, asks his father to bind him because he's afraid that as the knife plunges into his chest, he might inadvertently, automatically react and protect himself. That is interesting. We have no idea if that is true. It does appear that Isaac shared at least somewhat in the sacrifice, allowing himself to be bound. In the book of Hebrews, we do see a different concept in the Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 to 19. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. In a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. Slightly different concept here. The concept that Abraham believed that after he had sacrificed Isaac, God would raise him from the dead in order to fulfill promises made to Abraham about Isaac being the son through whom many nations would develop. Now there's a second reality here that I did want to focus on, and that is exactly where this sacrifice is taking place. According to Genesis chapter 22, it's on Mount Moriah. 2 Chronicles chapter 3, verse 1 says Solomon began to build the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem on Mount Moriah. Mount Moriah is Jerusalem. Dr. Dennis Kinlaw used this to describe what I do believe took place. He said that Abraham took his son Isaac to be sacrificed in Jerusalem. And just as the knife was plunging into his son's chest, an angel stopped Abraham. Dr. Kinlaw shifted now to the heavenly perspective. And he said, the eternal Son stood by the eternal Father and said, Father, this is not the last time that a father will be asked to sacrifice his son on this mountain, is it? The eternal Father looked at the eternal Son and said, no, son, it's not. The eternal Son looked at Abraham and Isaac and said, but the next time there will be no angel to stop the sacrifice, will there? And the eternal Father, looking at Abraham and Isaac, said, no, son. The next time, the sacrifice will be complete. What an image. God the Father and God the Son watching what's happening with Abraham and Isaac and realizing that it foreshadows a time when Jesus will make the complete sacrifice. God the Father will offer him, and God the Son will allow himself to be bound and nailed to a cross. Does God expect us to make sacrifices? Yes, he does. But he expects it to do it because he himself has done it as well. Today, if God is asking you to make a sacrifice, do it, recognizing that you're not the first. God made his sacrifice long ago. Like, follow, and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you used to listen to it. Email your questions to us at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow, we'll ask the question, why does everything happen to me?